The first of our speakers, in terms of the focus of this year's EPIC, is David Llewellyn. David, as you've seen from the programme, is the Vice Chancellor of Harper Adams University. David joined Harper in 1998 as Director of Corporate Affairs, before moving on as Principal in 2009. In 2012, David became the founding Vice Chancellor of Harper Adams University, and David has a long list of experience and qualifications to his name, and this includes a 2017 Templeton Fellowship report that he put together, focused on emerging technologies and skills needed in the poultry sector. So because of our focus, our theme this year, because of David's experience and his long list of qualifications in this particular area, and not least his Templeton report, the committee had no hesitation in asking David if he would open up today's conference with his thoughts on delivering progress through innovation and efficiency. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome David Llewellyn to the stage to give his paper, please.
Thank you, Gary, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I understand this is the political slot in the programme, so I'm going to offer you two things. Firstly, if you want any particular policies, I'm afraid I can't deliver them, but I'll pass them on. And secondly, I want to talk to you a little bit about Brexit, I think, and just to add on to what Gary was saying here, I think there are four reactions to Brexit, one of which is clearly despair, the second of which is actually we just don't care because we're trying to think about other things that are impact upon us. The third thing, of course, is that it might be seen as a complete opportunity, but with no consequences. And clearly here, I'm not entirely sure that Homer, what he's getting himself into there, because that isn't Marge. So let's bear that in mind. But the fourth thing really is, and this is important, how do we turn what could be a potential disaster into an opportunity, into success? And you can see here that that's just one example of agility in practice. Somebody who's landed on his feet instead of being landing on his face. But this is really important at the minute because we have to bear in mind that consumers are facing these challenges as much as the industry. And noting what Gary was saying here, we do know that there are consequences for the industry in all of this. One of the things I think that as an industry we're looking at is that we really do produce amazing products. This shows what we're trying to set out to do. But consumers are also changing because they have a different set of insights into the industry and what they think we need. And perhaps that's driven by some retailer views, but it is also possibly driven by consumers. The retailers at least would tell us that. This is really what they want, I guess. Really sort of extreme free-range chickens, a welfare environment, a healthy environment in which their food can be developed. But how do we actually then combine all this and look at future success whilst this world is changing around us very rapidly? Innovation, technology, the appliance of science is one of the answers that is often heralded. But it really, to my mind, is also about people. Because in turn, they are the folk who have to deliver that innovation and that appliance of science. So I set out to look at that issue back in 2017 with my Templeton report. It looked at both technological developments, but also at skills. And I took the views of industry at that stage about what was going on and what people thought would be coming down the tracks in the period to 2030. Now, we've been talking about a shortage of skills in the industry for decades. And in my research, I was looking at this and was finding it wasn't simply a Brexit phenomenon, of course. J.J. Alford, back in 1975, came up with a report at my institution looking at falling recruitment to poultry courses, a symptom he concluded of restructuring of the industry. 40 years later, Patrick Hook's Nuffield paper in 2016 on the challenges and opportunities to the UK broiler industry in the period to 2050 noted that there is a shortage of skilled people across the global poultry industry and very few strategies to recruit and retain people. So remember that point about labour shortages, if you will, as I continue. And Patrick, of course, is here today, so you can talk to him about that study. So what did I look at? I looked at emerging technologies, I looked at skills, we considered a range of developments that seemed to be impacting upon the industry at that point, and I conducted semi-structured interviews with industry representatives, just looking at the combination of where skills and technology overlapped. Now, it's also apparent that we've been talking about innovation forever, really. We have to appreciate that adapting to new technologies is nothing new. We've had to do it for a very long time, and we need expertise to enable that to happen. And just to illustrate that particular topic, this is the subject of genetics, and one example of technological change. And it has some history in the sector, of course, and this cartoon is from 1951, and it features Herbert Howes, who wrote the 1939 handbook on poultry farming called Modern Poultry Management. And this was at the point of his retirement. He joined Harper Adams in 1922, was just about to retire, and of course the young Harold Temperton, after who the report series is named, was returning to the college at that point to become an assistant lecturer and research assistant. And you can see here, calling genes your own. Perhaps a little prophetic when we think all that time ago about consumer views about genetic modification and genetic engineering in general. So it's clear to me, at least, that we need to have people who can have the brain power, but the capacity also to train the next generation of folk and to explain to the wider community, both in the industry and to consumers, about progress in science, to make sure that we don't fall down the rabbit hole of what happened with GM when we talk about different types of technologies coming over the horizon. What might they be? Well, this is a chart from Boston Consulting, a multinational survey of farmers. It looked at the influences on farming practice to 2030, and it talked a lot here about precision farming and automation, but also, and importantly, professionalism and labour shortages. So still pointing out those two parts of the labour part of the debate. So with that in mind, and moving on to the main summaries of my work in 2017, what were the main things that industry was saying were examples of technology changes in the next 20 to 30 years? Well, the industry was adopting technology. It was really trying to do that where economic returns were very clear. It might not be as up-to-date as other sectors in the view of those already in the poultry industry, but they were looking at that stage about transferring technologies into the industry from other sectors. Genetics and genomics obviously were very key points. But animal welfare research was clearly behind that, and trying to get at behavior as well as welfare. So looking at what could be done with technologies to monitor environments, monitor health and welfare. And then looking at how we can actually get that down to the individual bird level, with some dissension at that point about whether we could realistically do that in a flock environment. But more to come on that, no doubt, in the future. But it was pretty clear that the big issues here were around informatics, data analytics, data sharing globally, so that international businesses could get hold of data and understand what was going on across their business. Robotics and environmental monitoring, as it says there. And even microbiome analyses, so we could look at the whole farming system, the whole farming environment, to try to take account of what was going on. So those are the main things that the industry was saying to me were on their minds at that stage. I don't think that's really differed too much, and certainly other research work in this field has built upon it. And this quote is taken from the EU Precision Livestock Farming Project, looking at footpad lesions and hockburns in broilers, and looking at the way in which technology could be used to monitor that incidence and to produce algorithms which could then detect thresholds above which lesions were most probable. So we're getting into the realms, just as in other sectors, where algorithms actually begin to have some sway in our thinking and in terms of the technologies that we're wanting to develop. So, precision livestock farming, you've heard about it from others this morning already, and I took a stab at looking at whether it was gaining ground in the industry, and there were mixed views, to be honest. The economic viability, again, was a key issue there. Would it really do much to improve welfare and performance? What was the role of the stock person in conjunction with that technology? and how on earth could we actually try to see some way in which we could use both in the same environment to help standardize the data that we were getting and to benefit the production system overall. So there were some things on that list. I'll let you read it, but I think the key point here is really about it was really the industry wanted a better understanding of where precision livestock farming might fit in and what it might then be able to deliver in terms of expansion of poultry businesses, the data availability and its understanding, really trying to get people in a better position to manage overall. And then we had a discussion about the new technologies that were out there and who should be promoting and demonstrating them. And here there was quite a lot of concern really about competition still within the industry. Where was the pre-competitive environment in which some of these innovations could be tested and could then take place? And there was clearly a role here for farming bodies and the farming press and industry to try and get some of these new developments across to farming businesses. But this issue of independence is pretty rare, and the sorts of locations where this work could take place were not necessarily being brought into at that stage. Since then, of course, we've had the development of the Centre for Innovation Excellence in Livestock, CL, with new investments at SRUC in Scotland, the Bristol Poultry Unit, and the Centre for Digital Innovation applied to livestock at Newcastle University. Now, all of those places are locations where industry need to get engaged, because without that engagement, those centres are not going to thrive. And we have to find some way, in my view, to make sure that that happens, because the government is looking at these centres to try to be effective and to implement the agri-technology strategy created in 2013. So obviously there's work to do around joining up academia and industry still, and indeed I'm sure some of you in the room are already on that agenda, but others might well want to join in. So, labour and what might be needed in the future to handle new technologies. Well, again, back to this issue of good husbandry, making sure that there was better capacity in thinking around data and information management, and more on that in a word or two. Perhaps a new role, a technologist's role, somewhere in the industry. Clearly, we're thinking about upskilling at some stage, and you'll hear more about that throughout the day, I'm sure, because that upskilling is going to be necessary to deal both with the implementation of technology where it's taking over what labour might otherwise have done, and also to make sure that the poultry sector, the poultry industry, remains competitive with other sectors in the UK and, of course, internationally. So those skill sets need to run alongside a higher level of application of managerial skills, leadership skills in the industry, and so on, and actually greater transparency. This was an interesting point coming back from the industry, saying, you know, the age of the webcam is here. We need to be transparent with our customers, whoever they may be, and to do that, we need people who are really going to focus on the standards within the industry and make sure they are consistent and very, very high. So, highly skilled people managers and leaders, that labour supply remained a concern, and it was indeed confirmed that the pipeline, as I put it, was narrow and only half full. Where was that next generation going to come from, particularly given the age structure in the industry at the moment? So, I've talked about innovations in technology in other locations. Here's a little bit of work that's going on at Harper Adams. We've created something called RoboChick, which is a collaboration with industry, looking at a robotic environmental sensing platform. We're trying to do that in a live bird environment, and of course it's difficult. And it's interesting to note, I think there might be other ways of dealing with it. Trying to find a low-cost technical solution which will be adopted by industry is the key thing. And if you go back to what I was saying earlier, that translation of some of these innovations into real practice is a key thing now. We need to get to that critical tipping point. But there is potential here to build some of these systems, roving robots going around poultry houses, into building environmental systems, adjusting those systems in real time. And we know that this sort of system can work if we spend more time and resource on it to get it in place. On-farm rapid camper biota detecting, we're using biosensors as an alternative to other methods, and a sniffing device that could be used on-farm to test the air. So there are ways now of dealing with this, and indeed spoiled meat products, where you can use these biosensors really effectively to try and get hold of this particular issue if it happens to be occurring in your business. Metabonomic profiling of chicken eggs during storage, which is an interesting piece of work we're doing with Keele and Liverpool universities, looking at small molecule profiles of chicken eggs to help with traceability. So we're all concerned about whether we have real products going through the food chain and how we can prove that that's the case. This sort of analysis, which is coming over the horizon, may allow us to try and tackle that problem and deal with issues of food fraud, which must be, I think, something we pay attention to protect UK businesses at least. So those are just some of the issues that we're dealing with in my institution at the minute, and there are many more. But we took a look in this Temperton review of what was happening in the much longer term. Science that was just about beginning to gain ground. And some of these things are really quite exciting and quite challenging, but may well have some sort of impact on the industry. So transient electronics, the method by which we can develop systems which will disappear over time. So these are delivery devices that could be used both for environmental monitoring or drug delivery. They are made up of a series of compounds. They are heralding really a bioelectronics age. And this may seem like science fiction at the minute, but researchers are out there trying to push forward some of these techniques, not least in human medicine, and where human medicine leads, probably animal medicine will follow in this particular instance. The Internet of Beings, moving on from the Internet of Things, where there are devices that are connected, and we all know we've got these in our home now, they're ubiquitous. A few years ago, they just weren't around. So this is going to come. And what we're talking about here as a first stage is probably things like wearable technologies. So it occurred to me that if you were actually in a poultry shed, a really good stock person, you want to hang on to that person, you don't want to put a robot in the poultry shed because it's quite expensive, where do wearable technologies come in so that somebody who's actually going around that shed can be doing the automatic detecting of the environment as they're wandering around and doing their business? You know, the key thing to me is making it easy to connect both the application of skills and the use of technology. Now, that's a bit of a pipe dream at the moment, but these wearable technologies are beginning to occur. And where we can use them in the farming sector, we ought to be doing that, because it will help us combine the best of both worlds. Alternative meats, I'm sure you're very familiar with this whole swathe of developments here. It is coming. And back in 2017, of course, it was just about starting. Memphis Meats was out there producing chicken and duck products. Researchers in Belgium were looking at getting the price of those products down to the equivalent supermarket price, certainly of red meat. And it's now suggested that their products could be available in a high-end restaurant before 2021 and generally amongst consumers by 2021. And patents are reported to have been filed on the use of CRISPR to look at genetic modeling there to create chicken and beef tissue. So the key thing here is that this is evolving into a slightly wider set of applications using modern technologies to try to develop alternative meats. So we need to be mindful of that in the industry. That means that, again, that our standards, when these products are promoted as clean meats, our standards need to be extremely high, and we need to make sure we can compete with this sort of work going on, with backing from people like Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Susie and Jack Welch, and others, Tyson Ventures, all involved in trying to produce this alternative. And if I say to you that our work at Harper Adams in things like laser weeding systems, which we've developed, was backed by a major chemical company, an agrochemical company, you can see that different organizations are thinking differently about the future and about the impact of the work that is going on in terms of the environment and in terms of the way in which consumers are changing their thoughts about our food. So, what does that mean for a world in which we need to adapt? Well, we have education and skills development going on in our industry. There are really, really good established programs. There are scholars in this room, people who you are supporting to go through and find out more about the poultry sector. There are lots of other courses out there too, and you don't need to look very far actually. You can see diploma in poultry farming here. And if you note down here, a special Halloween deal, which ends today, by the way. Anybody who's got 19 quid to spend can get on this course today. This is how you get qualified. Now, I make no comment about this course. I have no idea what it's about. I've not signed up to it myself. I don't know. But there are a variety of providers out there looking at a market which needs to be consolidated a little bit. And to my mind, and I keep on getting asked the question, and quite rightly so, where are the courses for poultry at undergraduate level? Well, frankly, we need the demand for those courses, and industry has to help promote that demand so we can get those people coming through at an earlier stage. So it's a challenge to you to try to make sure we're getting the best environment to pull people into the industry, as well as our effort to try and push them. But this sort of thing is going on out there. I think that, clearly there are a variety of training programs, and we've also looked at my university about how we create that career path into the poultry industry. And with the British Poultry Council, back in 2010, we launched a scholarship program, which has been successful. Clearly, students will go on that. They won't necessarily end up in the industry. They might end up doing other things. But so far, we've supported 95 scholars with funding, industry placements, and careers. Some of them are in this room, having gone through that program and ended up in the industry, which is a great result. Now, what I think we need is a reinforcement of this sort of approach to make sure that we encourage young people thinking about going into agriculture somewhere to channel them into the poultry industry. And we're doing that with things like annual scholarship fairs, and several of the organizations in this room were at our most recent one. But you have to compete. And I'm putting that challenge out for you because in the last few weeks and into the next few weeks, over that period of a month, I will have had 207 companies on site looking for different types of agriculture, looking for young people to go into placements and into their businesses. 207 companies. Now, that is the competition out there to attract the talent, which is relatively rare, and we want to make sure the poultry industry gets its fair share. So I think we're doing quite a bit, really, to try and connect up young people who have an aspiration or can be convinced to think about a career in the poultry sector to go into it. But we also need to think about ways in which we can actually connect up that with a wider view about skill sets for the future. So, with that in mind, we're looking at ways in which we can encourage young people from different backgrounds. That was briefly a slide there of the Future of Farming event held at the New Scientist Live. 40,000 young people in central London coming to see about farming, supported by the Farmers Weekly, and thank you, because I know they're in the room, for that support. We were there too. That route to professional recognition, though, is really important, and the Food and Drink Sector Council is the body which is trying to progress this. And as a formal industry partnership, it is trying to look at ways in which we can create workforce and productivity gains for the industry. So there is a productivity working group. It is looking at how to get at improvements both through the implementation of innovation in technology, a what works approach, and professional training and development. And in parallel, this agri-food industry workforce skills and development strategy and a leadership group on which I sit, which is looking at that very issue. And that Food and Drink Sector Council is outlined here in this diagram. It has a large number, as you can see up here, of work streams. And the productivity one is essential, really. Peter Kendall has been leading on that of late. So that's its vision. This is the vision for the workforce development stream. This is where the Agri-Skills Initiative Leadership Group, which is independent but feeding into the Food and Drink Sector Council, is working with a view about CPD, a professional framework for competencies in agricultural and horticultural careers, and a careers stream as well. And I was taken with this comment by David Alvis in Farmers Weekly just recently. What he was saying here was that other countries are really taking hold of this professionalization or professional recognition of those working in the industry. They are demanding a set of qualifications. Northern Ireland is already doing this to level 3. We've researched out in New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, and they already have or are developing competency frameworks. If we don't do something in the UK, we will be left behind. And that pace of change is going to come about pretty quickly. So we need to think about this because the government is at least minded to listen at the minute about this whole agenda. So this is the Agri-Skills Initiative vision, looking at how we can create something along the lines of a professional body which will recognize in very, very broad terms existing qualifications, existing experience, looking at competencies, making it as broad as possible to bring as many people as possible into the field. And clearly, as ever with these things, there's a website to be developed and work to be done on that to follow. But I'll stop at this point and just say that actually there are two reports out just recently, in fact last week. The first one from that workforce skills group from the Food and Drink Sector Council. And that reported that jobs in the food and drink sector can often be classed as low skill, but businesses are in fact looking to fill roles across all skill levels, from intermediate through to higher and advanced levels. There's a problem about technical skills, but also management and leadership. Now, another report out in the same week, this was from the Industrial Strategy Council, looking at skills mismatches to 2030 using a model used by McKinsey, found that there were going to be massive underskilling in digital skills, especially advanced skills, with up to 2/3 of the workforce being behind by 2030. Hence this need to try and get ahead of that for this industry. Leadership and management, another sector of concern. But it said, and quoted an OECD report that said in terms of knowledge across 33 sectors, food production in the UK has an oversupply of skills compared with the average across other OECD countries. Go figure. One report says we've got too many people who are highly skilled. Another report says we need more. So we have to try and get this moment right to say to government we really do need to address this issue. That Industrial Strategy Council is tasked with providing impartial and expert evaluation of the government's progress in delivering the industrial strategy. We rely upon that strategy for funding to come into the industry. So we do need greater advocacy around this from the industry itself. So finally, a professional body with a professional framework looking at trying to provide a CPD input. This is controversial. This is something that may not be palatable to everybody in the industry, but we do need to think about how we present ourselves, not just to gain that recognition, but also to encourage young people to think about status raising of our professions, to make sure they are seen at the same sort of standard as others, and we encourage more people to come in. Why do we need to do that? Because it's going to be really important to think about competition internationally and ways in which we can actually create and promote careers in the sector to encourage people from different backgrounds in who have the skills in technology, data and analytics and so on that we are going to need in the future. We cannot do without them. We're going to have to find them somewhere, and we need as broad a church as possible to do that. So my conclusions here, looking at that pace of change, getting a comprehensive and project-based approach to demonstration and adoption, thinking about skills as you go down the list here, and trying to untangle the messages about the poultry industry and its responsibilities and roles, to look at different types of skill levels so that we can actually get out of this notion that skills mean the same thing to everybody. It doesn't. We have to think about ways in which it can actually be focused on both technical skills, the manual skills we need, the stock person skills, really good husbandry, and on leadership and management across the industry. And we need to think about getting that broader range of people in who can understand how to use the data, analytics, artificial intelligence, and all the other things that are coming our way that we're going to have to adapt and adopt to in the future. So I hope my provocation to you is really about trying to say we need the best people in the industry. We've got to work very hard at that. We have to make innovation work for us, but we can only do that if we get those good people. And it's vital that we do that if we're to face the challenges ahead, not just post-Brexit, but far into the future as we see technology gain even greater pace. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you for the provocation. Thank you for outlining a lot of good areas that we need to be focusing on going forward. There's certainly a lot happening in academia and Harper Adams in particular. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, please, to David. Would anybody like to ask a question? Right at the back, I think is it Richard Griffiths? Richard, there's a microphone on its way to you via James.
Hi, David. Thanks for that. We, I think, as an industry, pride ourselves on being sort of dynamic and flexible and being able to move to meet needs of consumers, retailers, etc. Can academia and the development of science and technology keep pace with the needs of the industry?
Yeah, it's a good question, Richard, because clearly we need to survive by gaining research income, working with industry to do that where we can, and we're quite prepared in some cases to do that. But we also need to make sure we're producing the people that industry need. And I think our collaboration through the BPC has been essential in that respect, trying to make sure we're getting at least that people side of it going. The more difficult part of it is actually trying to make sure there's a consistent and coherent approach to research, because it's a very competitive environment. So we understand absolutely in academia that industry is also researching, producing innovations, and we need to somehow find a way in which we can combine the best of both. Now, that What Works Centre I talked about, being promoted by the Food and Drink Sector Council, might be one way of doing that, because it will gather together the best evidence from systematic reviews of the type that you just saw in Stephen's presentation, I think, about precision livestock farming. And it will then be able to promote that out to practicing farmers. So there is a method, but I think it's probably a couple of years away if the government decides to support it.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Richard, for the question. Have we got another question? Tom Warnham on the front row. Thank you, Tom. John, please. David, just a quick question from me, if I may, whilst the microphone is making its way to Tom. You mentioned the challenge that we need to be doing more with academia, bringing industry and academia together. You mentioned the competition for young people. This is a very blunt question, and forgive me, but there's quite a bit that's being done at the moment, and you touched upon some of those areas. We're doing work as well with academia and research projects. We've got a research workshop that we have hold every year. A score out of 10, please. How would you score the poultry sector for its interaction with academia and the challenges, this engagement piece? Can you just give us a score, please?
Sure.
We'd like to revisit that in years to come.
Yeah, that's a tough question. It really does depend upon what you mean by collaboration. I guess in research it's going to depend upon certain companies and how they work with academia. So it's a range of scores, I suspect, from 5 to 10. In terms of support for getting young people in, we're doing a really useful piece of work, I think, through the scholarship program that we have. So I would rate that highly. In other areas, it's not so prevalent. So I think that we've got to think about better coordination between the industry and various aspects of academia to make sure that we're not missing bits along the way. My main concern at the minute is what are we doing around providing people who are capable in data management and in precision livestock farming techniques. And there isn't really much out there, I think, at the moment coming over the hill for that education and delivery. We are beginning to work on it, and I would encourage industry to talk to us, because you will have examples there that we can use in our training and teaching, and we also will have things that we're pushing on that might be of use to you.
Okay, thank you, David. Tom, please.
My question is regarding consumer perception. You mentioned lessons learned from GM in the cereal sector, and our sector not making this similar mistakes. Also, the tie-up between intensive production and extensive production and keeping the consumer engaged. What from your experience, are there some simple messages that we should try to deliver through the media, or should we just keep quiet and just do a good job ourselves? And
I think this is one for the industry as a whole, beyond the poultry industry. I think that gene editing, for example, is completely different than genetic manipulation. So we need to think about genetic modification. We need to think about ways in which we are presenting the science to consumers so that they do not fear it. Because one of my concerns is that, okay, we start to use algorithms in food production, and that may well come in due course. What will people feel about that? Because they're closer to, they have more concern perhaps about the source of their food and what's going on in the food chain than they might do about the use of those algorithms in banking and investments. So the key thing is about how do we educate enough people to see some of these technologies as not being something they should fear, but something that should be adopted by the industry to continue to produce really good, healthy food. So I don't have the answer to that just yet, because all I know is that when it came to GM, we had a hell of a problem, did we not? And we still have. And the European decision to put GE in the same classification is the wrong decision, ultimately. We've got to think about ways in which we can unlock that, and that means trying to get across to whatever government we have next, in whatever environment we have come next year, the fact that we need some of the more useful sciences, I think, to be brought into place so that we can then progress that innovation agenda.
David, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the questions. Can we have a round of applause, please, for David?
Thank you.